If you haven't been able to tell from the first 9 or 10 videos on this channel, depending on when I decide to upload this, there is a consistent through line of mental health and memories. Those are both things that I care about a lot, and I feel like they aren't really discussed enough, especially on this website. I'm proud to say that in the past year or so, ever since I embarked on a journey of a lifetime that I may or may not discuss at some point on this channel, I've come to a point where I'm able to regulate my depression. It's always there, but after what has seemed like an eternity, I've finally pulled myself into a mind space where I'm able to take the necessary action in order to better myself, not only with my mental health, but just my health in general. For the first time in a while, I've found myself feeling consistently happy. Sure, there are always moments of sadness, as anyone who has clinical depression will tell you, but I've come to a point where I can avoid it consuming me through healthy habits and completely processing my traumas. I know this is a super depressing way to start out a video, but trust me, it gets much better. The entire point of me telling you this is that this is the first time I felt happy for this long of a period of time since the summer of 2018, which just so happens to be what I believe is the last great summer that cinema has ever seen.
Can't cry, forget that we're young, danger is fun, only afraid of goodbye. Sweet summer sky.
So, let's set the stage, shall we? It's April 2018, and me and my best friend, who will be called Clark for this video, have both just finished our winter semester of university. We were in a stage of our friendship where we were both looking towards the future, and in a couple of years, the goal was for us to finish university and move out to California to pursue our dreams in the entertainment industry. We were closer than we had been in a couple years or so, and all we wanted to do was create together. We had been making videos on YouTube together for the past 5 years or so, but never consistently. So when May came around and the weather started to become gorgeous, as it always does in Michigan, Clark came up with a plan. For the summer, he planned on staying on his father's boat that he docked in a harbor in a beautiful city about an hour away from us. He told me that he thought he could convince his dad to let me stay in the boat with him as it had 2 bedrooms. During the school year, we lived about 30 minutes away from each other after being next door neighbors as kids, so it was difficult to set aside time to chill, especially with working in university work weighing on us. In this situation, we would be able to make so much content while still working our jobs in one of the most gorgeous and serene cities our state had to offer, thus making it the best summer of all time. I was so insanely down. I started scouring the internet for jobs around the harbor and even got a couple interviews within the span of a week, including a laundromat that was a literal 5-minute walk away. Everything was going according to plan. Until it wasn't. Once May came around and the boat was docked, Clark asked his dad if I could stay there with him, to which he said a resounding no. He was hesitant in trusting Clark there alone, let alone the 2 of us together, so it seemed like our dreams were dashed. But the thing about the 2 of us is that we weren't the kind to give up very easily. Considering the fact that I was a manager of a mall kiosk, I made the schedules every week and decided to put myself on the morning shift every day, so in the evenings I could drive to the boat and we could still have the best summer ever. Clark managed to do the same, and thus the plan was set in motion. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I really couldn't dream of a better summer. A diet of Applebee's and bell peppers from the 24-hour grocery store, filming videos every week in any location we could think of, sitting on the beach with my friends as the sun set. Everything was pure bliss, yet nothing, and I mean nothing, could compare to the movies. There was a really cute theater that was about a 10-minute drive from us. We were in the final days of the greatest app of all time, MoviePass, being a functioning company, and the majority of the content we made on YouTube were film reviews and content about movies. It was the perfect storm for us to go see every single movie that we could, and by God did we. From May to August, the 2 of us were at the theater seeing every new release possible. So believe me, it's not the nostalgia talking when I say the summer of 2018 was the best summer for cinema in recent memory. Every week there were between 2 or 4 films being released nationwide, which seems bonkers in the modern landscape of film production, and they were a great mix between blockbusters and indie hits. It was like being a kid in a candy shop where the candy was infinite and the variation of candy was endless. I didn't know how to properly structure this discussion, but chronologically seems the most reasonable. So, let's start with May. Although most people don't consider summer having commenced until June, the film industry starts ramping up the blockbusters and release rate a month earlier. That being said, you've probably imagined that it really starts going crazy when June hits, right? Wrong! May 4th, the first week of the summer adventure that my friend and I were embarking on, we went to see a double feature of Bad Samaritan, a kind of underrated thriller with an amazing performance by David Tennant, and the Sundance darling Tully, one of Jason Reitman's best dramas ever that ended up in my top 15 of the year. And 2 days later, we went to see the horrible Overboard remake with Anna Faris and Eugenio Debrez, and sure, it was awful, but it was something that made me feel something. Nowadays, we don't even get 2 new releases in a single week, let alone 2 releases that make you feel something. Sure, part of this is due to the pandemic, but even in 2019, it started slowing down a little bit. Anyways, getting back on track, the next week saw the release of 2 hilariously bad films on opposite sides of the spectrum. The first film was Life of the Party, which is just a live-action and extremely goofy movie with Melissa McCarthy and none of what made the latter funny. The second was Breaking In, which is every other home invasion film to ever be made, but it was enjoyable watching Gabrielle Union try her darndest to absolutely no avail. Then if you needed a palate cleanser from those 2 trash cans, you could go see one of the best R-word revenge movies in recent memory, aptly titled Revenge, a French indie film that was released to critical acclaim at TIFF. Now I know you can probably see the pattern I'm drawing here, but the best example, perhaps of the whole video, comes next week on May 18th, where all 5 of these films were released on the same day, with most actually being nationwide. The most prominent released was Deadpool 2, which I doubt I need to inform you about, followed by Book Club, the old person rom-com of the year, where a group of gal pals read 50 Shades of Grey for said book club. First Reformed, one of the best movies of the 2010s with one of the best performances of all time with Ethan Hawke, a documentary on Pope Francis, and Show Dogs, a classic Raja Gosnell property that came under fire for allegedly teaching children to be alright with inappropriate touching from strangers. Clark and I managed to squeeze every single one of those into one weekend, and we would both tell you it was one of the most insane weekends ever. You couldn't find 5 films that are farther apart in both genre and content, and we were given them all in one weekend. It was a movie fanatic's paradise, a feeling of bliss if ever there was one. Going to see one of the best psychological drama/horror films that I've ever seen, and immediately following that up with First Reformed, was something out of a fever dream. Next week was a little toned down, but we still got both Solo, which I also don't have to explain, and How to Talk to Girls at Parties, an A24 film based on a Neil Gaiman short story, directed by the person who did Short Bus, John Cameron Mitchell. Once again, my Thursday nights would be filled with these insane double features that would continuously blow my mind. So at this point, we're moving into June, but the momentum keeps increasing. On the first release date of June, which just so happened to be the 1st of June, we were presented with another buffet of choices. The most popular attraction was Action Point, a classic Johnny Knoxville stunt-filled extravaganza that actually had a semblance of a plot, which, let's face it, nobody cared about. Was the film bad on its own? Sure, but the experience of watching it in a theater filled with everyone laughing elevated the viewing to a different level completely. There was also Adrift, a drama about Shailene Woodley and Sam Claflin stranded in the middle of an ocean. It wasn't anything special, but think about the last time there was a survival drama released nationwide in theaters. Exactly. This is something that I'll get to later on, but revisiting this time really helped me stop taking the beautiful diversity of cinema for granted. And we haven't even gotten to the big hitter of the week, which is Upgrade. I can't talk about this movie without getting super excited, so excuse me if I get too rambly, but Upgrade is genuinely one of the most overlooked and badass action sci-fi wombo combos that I've ever seen. I still remember leaving the theater in absolute shock and awe, and talking with Clark about how amazing Logan Marshall Green was, and that the dude from Saw directed that, and how we hoped it would be turned into a franchise for hours at our local Applebee's, watching the sunset over the highway. We also saw American Animals, another very underappreciated and brilliantly stylized heist film with a great ensemble of Evan Peters, Barry Keoghan, Blake Jenner, Jared Abramson, the legendary Udo Kier, and Ann Dowd. I remember driving to work Monday morning thinking there was no way that weekend could be beat. And then next weekend happened. You thought last week was diverse, we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. Thursday night, Ocean's 8. The film was much less interesting than the bountiful amount of pointless discourse involving the effectiveness of gender-swapped movies, but it ended up being a decent heist comedy with a bunch of hot women in it, so I don't understand why my friends other than Clark were complaining so much. Men. Friday Afternoon, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Undoubtedly, unequivocally, one of the top 5 documentaries of the year in a year that had a plethora of fantastic documentaries. A wholesome story about a guy who just wanted happiness and care to be the new norm in a world absorbed by negativity was such a refreshing story to see on screen. You know what was even more refreshing though? Saturday night, Hereditary. Although it isn't the catalyst for the genre that every film snob calls elevated horror now, it was the first to get a mainstream release with a first-time director, no less. Hereditary was one of the most interesting moments in cinema, as we were in a theater surrounded by the usual horror crowds that would usually walk out halfway through something like Hereditary, yet everyone stayed and absolutely loved it. This is the film that I usually cite as the turning point, where people started opening up to the subgenre to the point where now films like Hereditary are mentioned in horrible meta jokes in mainstream releases like Scream from this year. Y'all are so lucky I wasn't making videos back in January. I would have torn that movie to shreds. Anyways, to cap off the weekend, Sunday was Hotel Artemis. Although Hereditary pulled a lot of the viewers away from it, as it was projected to make between 5 and 9 million opening weekend and only ended up with 3.2, it was still a really solid action film with a to die for ensemble. As the next weekend starts, we're at the halfway point of the month, June 15th. And the movie industry is like, you know, we don't want to slow the momentum, but we've been giving you way too many great films. Here's a weekend of trash. The main release of the weekend, Incredibles 2. I've never seen a film be hyped into oblivion for over a decade, only to be released as a mediocre product that left everyone in complete confusion. This was the film that made me realize that Pixar can't make sequels, because if you mess up the Incredibles sequel, there's no way you can handle any of your worst entities. Even though it was massively disappointing, it was still cool to see a bunch of people my age get hit with a massive nostalgia wave in the theater. Now, if you thought that was a bad start, we're about to drop off a giant, albeit amusingly giant, cliff. Tag. What to even say about Tag? I've never seen such an amazing ensemble of comedic actors get fumbled so hard. Jake Johnson, John Hamm, Hannibal Buress, Isla Fisher, Rashida Jones, and Little Rel Howery, all fumbled by a director that has a 5-sentence Wikipedia page and hasn't been heard from since. We all know how bad Tag was, and surprisingly, that's not even the worst film to be released that weekend. No, that would be Gotti. Although I think that I'm pretty good at storytelling and my minor in writing has helped me become more descriptive with my words, I will never be able to describe the feeling of watching Gotti in a theater. Euphoria doesn't even begin to cover it. Watching John Travolta stumble around without an ounce of direction or charisma or talent was completely mind-boggling in the best way possible. The next week didn't really offer much other than Jurassic World 2, which is surprisingly the least noteworthy film on this list, and Damsel, which was just great cinematography and a really good Robert Pattinson performance. Things heated up again on the last release date of the month, June 28th. Although the feature release Sicario 2 wasn't much to write home about, especially compared to its Denis Villeneuve-led predecessor, the other two releases were. Leave No Trace was a quiet and gorgeous experience from Deborah Granick that always gets lost in the hustle and bustle of 2018, with breathtaking performances from both leads in Ben Foster and Thomasin McKenzie. In contrast, the second film of my Friday double feature, Uncle Drew, is one of the only mainstream comedies in recent memory that got a fair amount of laughs out of me. Not only was it Lil Rel Howery's breakout vehicle after he set himself up perfectly with Get Out the year prior, but it also proved basketball players can actually act, with Kyrie Irving putting in an actually decent performance. So we're about halfway through the summer at this point, so let's give you a little halftime update on Clark and I. At this point in the summer, we are fully in the swing of things. We are making money, we are making content, and most importantly, we are making memories. Life is good. And that's quite the shock, because for the entire school year leading up to the summer of 2018, I was holed up in an apartment alone, more depressed than I'd ever been, questioning if life was worth living anymore. There would be weeks where I wouldn't leave the apartment, not for work, not for class, not for my friends, not for my family, not for anything. Then 3 months later, there I am, enjoying life, going on dates, working my butt off, and feeling free. It's funny how things change like that. I wish I could go back and tell 2017 me that everything was going to be okay. So we move on to July, where things start to slow down. Psych! On the 4th of July, everyone's favorite film franchise, The Purge, gets another entry with the first Purge. Listen, the Purge films are abysmally average, but watching them in a packed theater was a fun event that you were guaranteed every other year or so. And releasing it on a national holiday upped the ante even more on that vibe. Then we get to the actual weekend, and the ball continues rolling. Ant-Man and the Wasp is the main attraction, which has always been an interesting franchise to me just because of how weird it is in theory and how that contrasts with how boring the actual films are. Like, if it wasn't Paul Rudd, do you think there's any chance we would have gotten an Ant-Man sequel? Yeah, that's what I thought. The more intriguing release, however, is the undercard this week in Sorry to Bother You. Listen, I'm not really a big fan of the film. I think I gave it a 7 out of 10 and I find it pretty overrated. That being said, I have never seen another film like it. Seeing the trailer for it and that it's directed by a dude who looks like this and starring Lakeith Stanfield, I was already really excited. Then I saw it in an empty theater with Clark, and oh my god, that was not at all what I was expecting. After Hereditary, Sorry to Bother You was the second freshest viewing experience I had that summer, and losing my mind and just screeching in the theater when The Thing happened was insane. The release date next week is July 13th, and that ball I keep mentioning has no signs of slowing its roll. Once again, as a common theme throughout the weeks, the least interesting release is the most popular one, that being Hotel Transylvania 3. I'm not averse to the franchise, but at a certain point it all gets to be rather repetitive regardless of the fun moments scattered throughout. One rung down the ladder, we have Skyscraper. While at first glance this looks like your average rock action-adventure property, I have to tell you that you're misinformed. It's so much worse than that. Skyscraper is one of the rare, so bad it's good films that slip through the cracks of time, and it seems like nobody remembers it but me. It throws every cliche inside a blender, combines it with some insane overacting, and puts out an amazing time that nobody saw because they were either at Hotel Transylvania 3 or the next film on the proverbial ladder, 8th Grade. While the mainstream audience was busy seeing the former, 8th Grade was the talk of the town in the online film space. Bo Burnham and Elsie Fisher were both revelations. So much so that there was an outcry when the two were nominated for Oscars the following year. And while I think that the film is grossly puffed up in quality, I do think that the film is very well made and accurately captures a certain sector of anxiety and awkwardness of adolescence. Finally, rounding out the incredibly diverse week was Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, a quaint little biopic from Gus Van Sant about a newly quadriplegic cartoonist recovering from alcoholism. Once again, this was a gem that got lost in the commotion of 2018 and had some really profound things to say immediately after I watched The Rock jump off a giant crane into a skyscraper. July 20th is a little less extensive. I'm just kidding, why would you even begin to think that? Mamma Mia 2, yes please, give me the singing, give me the dancing, give me the ABBA, and let me double feature that with one of the most solemn and realistic depictions of racial injustice in America on film in Blindspotting, with an Oscar-worthy performance from clipping frontman Daveed Diggs. Seriously though, Blindspotting was haunting and doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Brilliant stuff. Too solemn of an ending of the double for your taste? Well, how about we do another double feature the next day of Denzel Washington being Denzel Washington and doing Denzel Washington things in The Equalizer 2, during which Clark and I pitched The Equalizer 3, The Euthanizer, where Denzel is retired from the game and decides to become a veterinarian. And a shockingly sequel to one of the worst horror movies ever, Unfriended Dark Web. I know I went through these 4 fast, but that whole weekend was a blur of rapture, and that's how I wanted to portray it. Believe it or not, the next week does genuinely slow down a little bit, not in quantity, but in the diversity category. The 2 headliners this week were Mission Impossible Fallout and Teen Titans Go to the Movies, both franchise films that didn't really add anything to them, and neither experience at the theater really sticks out in my mind. The only other release of the week, Hot Summer Nights, actually does stick out in my mind, but that was because of how disappointing it was. An A24 film with Timothée Chalamet should have been able to get me invested from the jump, but it was so all over the place I couldn't find an open moment to invest myself. So we finally found ourselves in August. The daylight is getting shorter, the air is getting crisper, and the dreadful feeling of it all being over is slowly creeping up on Clark and I. Did we let that stop us? Absolutely not. We were operating at an all-time high level, creating content constantly, but never to the point where it interfered with our enjoyment. And even though it was still going so great, there was a question that plagued my mind from time to time. What's going to happen when the summer ends? Will I be able to hold on to this feeling of genuine happiness? Or will it eventually fade away into nothingness until it becomes a distant memory of a life that seems forever ago? The first week of August starts off relatively strong, with a classic property being brought back to life with Christopher Robin. Is the film good? Not particularly, but you can bet your bottom dollar that I was there opening night because of my undying love for Winnie the Pooh, and just like every other Pooh property, it was aggressively wholesome, and sometimes you just need that. The next day we took ourselves to The Darkest Minds, which is low-key the reason that they stopped making those dystopian teen movies that the internet is currently in a nostalgic frenzy over. It was awful and really boring, but Amandla Stenberg was gorgeous in it, so that's something. A Friday night was the dreaded screening of The Spy Who Dumped Me, which was actually better than The Darkest Minds, but that's not really saying much. An empty theater on opening weekend definitely helped though, as nobody could report us to the staff for running all over the theater and mimicking the action scenes. Finally, we got The Miseducation of Cameron Post, which is a very solid coming-of-age drama about a girl being sent to a conversion camp. It was definitely a more serious turn from the previous 3 outings, but it was also much better than the other 3, so that's a huge plus. I'll be honest, this week looks really cool and diverse on paper, but in all reality, it's kind of brought down by the fact that 3 of the films are pretty shit. Okay, this next week is actually a banger though, as we are graced with the presence of The Meg. Okay, nobody is brave enough to say this, so I will. I truly believe that The Meg is one of the best camp films of the 2010s and is criminally underviewed despite being such. I will stand on this hill until the end of time, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. I mean, for Christ's sake, the movie ends with a shark getting eaten by other sharks in China. What more could you possibly want? What? Too silly for you? Well, how about a fresh Spike Lee joint in BlacKkKlansman that has amazing performances, amazing cinematography, and a stamp of overrated for me, so you know it's the greatest film of all time. Even though I find it to be rather incohesive, I can't deny that a lot of the parts at play are really great, and despite the lack of shark attacks, it's still a good film. It's not the best movie that was released that weekend though. That award would go to the film we went to see opening night, a special honor for the film we're most excited for, Slender Man. An all-time low performance from Joey King at the time, whose entire career is just a montage of all-time low performances, some of the worst scares in the history of modern horror, which is definitely saying something, and an intensely disgusting color palette are just a few of the many reasons this joins Gotti as the second film of the summer to enter the So Bad It's Good Hall of Fame. This is the point where things actually start to slow down, but for the sake of the video, we're going to round it out perfectly. The next week of August 17th was a historic week for the summer of 2018, where we didn't go to see a single film that weekend. And really, can you blame us? Do you think that either Alpha or Mile 22 looks even the slightest bit interesting? Of course not. Well, I wish I could give you something for this week, but... Oh, wait. Actually, during the week, Crazy Rich Asians came out, and we definitely went to see that. And not only was the film a giant step forward for representation on screen, being the first modern story with an all-Asian cast in 25 years, but it's also a really solid rom-com in its own right. Sure, it doesn't break the genre and there are a bunch of things that don't work, but there's a lot of charm in it and it was a pretty solid outing in a summer filled with a bunch of solid outings. So although this week doesn't have much to show for it, the next week packs two very notable films for very different reasons. The headliner is of course the worst of the two, sticking to the trend, in The Happy Time Murders, which... I don't even know how you start up a conversation about The Happy Time Murders. It's one of the worst films ever made, shocking in its complete ineptitude of every facet of filmmaking there is, and it is possibly the least funny comedy ever, not due to my distaste for the subject matter, but simply because none of the jokes that they make in the film are even really jokes. Needless to say, Clark and I had an amazing time being completely baffled on how this even came to be and howling with laughter at the pure lunacy of Brian Henson pissing all over his father's grave. On a much better note, to counteract the heinous crimes of The Happy Time Murders, we have the indie sleeper hit of the year, Searching. Aside from the people who saw it at Sundance, the quality of the computer interface-based thriller shocked the world, including myself. Seeing how amazing John Cho is at emoting through a screen and all of the subtle nuances that could have benefited another computer interface-based film from earlier in the summer was such a cool experience. Everyone left the theater in such good spirits and people were honestly impressed with an indie thriller, which is something you can't often say about mainstream audiences. Unfortunately, as much of a whirlwind spectacle that this summer of cinema was, it ends with a whimper instead of a bang. There were only 2 releases for the final week of August. One was Kin, which Clark and I had no interest in seeing, and the other was Operation Finale, which we did see, but just ended up being a mediocre drama with not much special to mention about it. And with that, the 4 months of the best summer of my life had come to an end. I had made a bunch of content that I still take pride in to this day, even though a lot of it never got released. I worked my butt off as a manager and actually succeeded in pulling in some pretty solid profit for my company. I strengthened a bond with my best friend that I didn't think could be strengthened anymore. And I saw more movies than I could ever imagine. I was happy. The problem was that, more than any other season, summer is a fleeting feeling. It's a sensation that you get caught up in, and then before you know it, it's over with no signs of coming back for another 9 months, especially in the Midwest. So as I geared up for another year of university, that nagging thought pushed itself to the forefront of my mind. Is that it? In the past 4 months, I had the freedom to be who I wanted to be and do what I wanted to do with little repercussion. That becomes much more difficult when you add on a full load of college courses. Suddenly you're working and all of those moments of wonder are replaced by a monotonous slog of endless grind. I had been depressed out of my mind for the last school year, to the point where my free time became as monotonous as anything else, and the biggest outing I would have would be to go to Denny's at 2 a.m. to eat some more. I had clutched onto a happiness that I hadn't really felt during my entire time at university, but I was worried that it would dissipate as quickly as it appeared. It didn't. The 2018-2019 academic year was by far the best one that I had ever had. Graduation was on the horizon, I kept my nose to the grindstone, and for the first time ever, I made friends in my university courses. I was usually the guy who sat in the back of the class and didn't give anyone the time of day, but something made me this time around, and that made all the difference. Speaking of friendships, I still maintained that bond with Clark that the summer had created. We continued watching films throughout the rest of the year, and even though content took a backseat to our work and studies, we still found time to film a video every now and then. I managed to go from the worst year of my college life to the best year of my college life. Just like that. I was still kind of happy. Sure, reality had definitely taken over and severely hindered that happiness, but there was still a glimmer of that bliss in my soul from the summer of 2018 lingering around. In closing, I want to say something to anyone in my audience or anyone who just stumbled across this video who is going through a hard time right now and feels like they're stuck in an eternal rut with nowhere to go. Remember the moments. Remember the moments where you felt like nothing could touch you and you were at the top of the world. Remember the moments, no matter how rare they are, that you were happy. Then, bottle that feeling. Store that feeling in a crevice in your brain that you rarely visit. And when you start feeling like there's no point in continuing on, open that bottle and let that feeling flow through your body. Let your memories of happiness act as a shot of pure ecstasy to your being, and remember that there are going to be times where you feel like that again. You may not feel like there will be, but I guarantee you there will. One day, just like me at this very moment, you will be able to live your very own summer of 2018 for the rest of your life. And if at the end of the day, none of those things work for you, there is one ultimate final solution. Just watch Gotti. It always makes everything better.